Everyone once had an innocent and pure student life. However, the young people in today's story carried too many haunting memories, surrounded by terrifying tales at their school, especially the story of a female student who became pregnant and chose to end her life. Welcome to today's story that Hui will tell. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Nguyen Hui's Mysterious Stories. Here we share spiritual stories from daily life sent by people from all regions. Today's story comes from video number 386, a letter from Mr. Hong. This story happened over 20 years ago, about the high school where he studied. The school still operates today, so he prefers not to reveal its name or his hometown, as mentioning his location would immediately identify the school. His house was only 7 or 8 kilometers from school, but back then, transportation wasn't as convenient as today. The main means of travel were boats and canoes. You couldn't just take a vehicle over mountain passes to reach your destination. When Hong entered high school, he stayed in the dormitory built right within the school grounds. Let me briefly describe the school layout for better visualization. From the main gate looking in, you'd see 3 building blocks forming a U-shape. The right side housed the administration offices, the left contained classrooms, and the block cutting across in the middle also served as classrooms. Each block had multiple floors. Behind this middle block stood another classroom building on the right side, with a canteen on the left. Past the canteen stretched a row of dormitory rooms for boarding students, 10 rooms in total. The first 5 rooms were for female students, the next 5 for male students. In front of the dormitory building lay a vast grassy field where the boys played football every evening. Next to the field was a very deep pond filled with water spinach, about 6 meters wide and over 10 meters long. The teachers had stocked it with many large snakehead fish. Life in the dormitory was crowded but joyful. Hong remembered his father bringing him to school by boat, rowing while carrying rice, salt, fish sauce, seasoning powder, and soy sauce. He even recalled that on his first day, they brought clay pots and a stove with bundles of firewood. As life was difficult then, everyone used wood-burning stoves, not gas stoves like today. But when they arrived, older students told them the dormitory already had stoves and pots, so his father returned home, leaving only the firewood and cooking supplies. Being only 16 and living away from home for the first time, Hong felt overwhelmed. However, the 11th and 12th grade students were experienced and understanding, helping him adapt quickly to school life. Huang's room was number 10, housing 6 people total, himself and a classmate named that from 10th grade, 2 11th graders named Huyen and Lam, and 2 12th graders named Tri and Ho. Everyone washed their own clothes, but cooking was shared. Whoever finished classes first would cook rice, others would help with side dishes, and those who did nothing would wash dishes after eating. Everyone contributed without shirking responsibilities. This was the general life in the dormitory. Throughout his 3 years in high school, supernatural events continuously occurred around Hong. On his very first day, Tri asked him in that, "Are you too afraid of ghosts?" Hong, being a farmer's son accustomed to wandering fields and rice paddies at night, replied confidently, "No, ghosts should be afraid of me, not the other way around." That, however, was terrified of ghosts. Hearing Tri's question, he nervously asked, "Does this room have ghosts?" Knowing that's fear, Tri laughed and said, "Just asking, there are no ghosts here." At that time, 2 beds remained empty, 1 upper bunk and 1 lower. Tri then suggested that since Hong wasn't afraid of ghosts, he should take the upper bunk, while that, being scared, should take the lower bed for easier escape if needed. Hong jokingly asked, "Did someone die in the upper bed?" Tri replied, "If you're scared of ghosts, stay on the lower bunk so you can run faster if something chases you." The first few days passed normally until that night, when Hong was sleeping soundly and heard footsteps pacing back and forth. The bathroom was outside, not inside the room, so if someone needed to use it, they would go out and return, not pace around. Hong had a habit of being unable to sleep when hearing such sounds. Initially lying face down toward the wall, he turned around to see who was pacing in the room. The room had a red candle-shaped bulb that provided very dim light, the type every household used as a nightlight back then. Opening his eyes, Hong clearly saw a person pacing back and forth in the room. He could only see from the chest up due to his position on the upper bunk. Normally, Lam had a habit of walking around while studying, carrying a book. At first, seeing someone pacing, Hong thought it was Lam studying. However, this person was completely bald, definitely not Lam. None of the roommates were bald. If Lam were studying, he would turn on the main light for adequate illumination. The candle bulb was too dim for reading. Knowing it wasn't Lam, but not yet thinking of ghosts, Hong suspected a thief had entered to steal money. He wasn't particularly worried about losing money, as he was very careful. He wore underwear, put money in the underwear pocket, then wore outer pants over it. Anyone wanting to steal his money would find it extremely difficult. Hong lay still, not daring to move, fearing the intruder might have a weapon. He kept his eyes barely open, watching. The figure continued pacing without searching or looking for anything. Eventually, the person climbed onto Hong's bed and lay down right beside him. When the figure climbed up, Hong saw clearly it was a very large man with a bald head, wearing a t-shirt and dress shirt, appearing to be over 40 years old. Hong wanted to shout and ask who he was, but at that moment, his body became rigid. He couldn't move, turn, or make any sound. The man stepped over Hong and lay down on the inner side against the wall. Now Hong knew what he was encountering. He forced himself to lie still and recite Buddhist prayers until his limbs gradually regained movement. He pretended as if he had seen nothing, climbed down to use the bathroom. When he glanced back at his bed, the man had vanished. Though claiming not to fear ghosts, encountering such an experience was terrifying. Hong sat outside breathing fresh air before daring to return and sleep until morning. Nothing else happened until dawn. The next morning, Hong didn't immediately tell anyone. At dinner, that mentioned to Lam, "Why did you study so late last night?" Lam replied, "When did I study?" That insisted, "I clearly saw you pacing around studying, but you're denying it." Lam seemed confused, not knowing what to say. Tri intervened, saying, "If you were studying, just admit it. Why deny it? I also saw you pacing around studying clearly. Why be ashamed of studying?" Hong noticed Tri winking at Lam while speaking. Lam stammered, "I was embarrassed about studying, so I hid it." That laughed, "There's nothing to hide about studying. I saw you pacing and knew you were studying. Then I went back to sleep without disturbing you." Tri and Huyn then changed the subject. That didn't pay attention, but Hong noticed their attitudes. The matter passed until several nights later when Hong had a vivid dream. He dreamed the same bald man from before came to wake him up. In the dream, Hong seemed to wake up and asked who he was and how he entered the room. The man said, "That bed belongs to me. Why do you keep sleeping in my bed? I've been patient for days, but now I won't tolerate it anymore. You must return my bed." Hong argued, "This is the school dormitory. Where did you come from claiming this bed is yours? If you don't leave, I'll call security to arrest you." After saying this, the man suddenly looked at Hong with fierce, angry eyes and lunged forward, grabbing Hong's throat. Though Hong was healthy and normally could carry 50 to 60 kilograms rice bags easily, he couldn't resist. The man pressed down, choking him until he nearly suffocated. Hong struggled desperately but couldn't break free. After what felt like an eternity, he jolted awake, drenched in sweat, but the suffocating sensation remained. He gasped for air, remembering the dream that felt more real than any dream should. Usually in the evenings, the students would exercise or play football, then shower before dinner. The next day, while playing football, Hong turned to Tri and asked, "This room has ghosts, doesn't it? Tell me the truth." Initially, Tri laughed and said there were no ghosts. Hong insisted, "Don't hide it anymore. I know everything." He then recounted his experiences and explained that the figure that saw pacing wasn't Lam studying, but the ghost of the bald man. Also, when Tri first asked about fear of ghosts and assigned beds based on bravery, there was clearly something behind it. Hong demanded the truth so they could find a solution. At this point, Tri stopped hiding the truth. He admitted the bald man's ghost had been there for a long time, since before their arrival. Anyone sleeping in that bed got driven away by him. The pacing figure was a common sight. They'd grown accustomed to it and were no longer afraid. Hong was shocked that they knew about the ghost, yet still assigned him that bed. Tri explained, "I thought you weren't afraid, and since you slept peacefully the first night without incident, I assumed you had strong spiritual energy that the ghost didn't dare disturb. I didn't expect him to bother you." Hong asked what to do about being driven away. Tri said that bed required someone very brave to sleep in, but previous students usually made offerings. They would buy some cakes and fruits to offer on the 15th of each lunar month, asking the ghost to let them stay peacefully without disturbance. After the offering, they could sleep normally without being driven away. Hong followed this advice, and after making offerings, the ghost stopped bothering him. However, as Tri mentioned, they occasionally still saw the shadowy figure pacing in the room. Initially, that thought it was Lamb studying, right? Usually seeing this, that would go back to sleep. That day, that decided to tease Lamb playfully. When he peeked out and saw it wasn't Lamb, he knew it was the ghost and screamed loudly, waking everyone up. The roommates, already knowing about the ghost, just laughed. Finally, they explained everything to that, who became so frightened he wanted to move to another room. However, all other rooms were full, and they convinced him the ghost was harmless. Even Hong, who had been driven away and felt the ghost lying beside him, wasn't afraid anymore. Eventually, that accepted the situation and continued living there. They maintained the practice of making regular offerings, even inviting the ghost to join their meals. Hong and that lived there for 3 years without further harassment from the bald man. Later, when new students arrived, they would explain the situation clearly and instruct them to follow the same practices to avoid problems. This was one story. Now Hong would tell about the fish pond. As mentioned earlier, the school had a fish pond filled with many large snakehead fish. Students back then were poor and usually bought cheap fish bones and scraps with a little meat to cook and eat. Sometimes they cooked with soy sauce, sometimes with peanuts, served with vegetables. He remembered 1 kilogram cost only about 2,000 to 3,000 dong. People say the hierarchy goes: first devils, second demons, third students. With so many large snakehead fish in the pond, how could the students resist? All boarding students united in agreement to secretly fish once every 2 weeks. Fishing too often would lead to discovery. Each fishing session yielded 3 to 4 fish, sometimes 5, each weighing 2 to 3 kilograms. After catching the fish, they would distribute them among the rooms. Back then, they specialized in making crispy fried snakehead fish served with vegetables. Their usual diet was quite harsh, so this occasional treat was wonderful. The school grounds were spacious, and later some students even cultivated vegetables, eventually saving money on buying vegetables. Years later, Hong met some former teachers who admitted they knew about the students' secret fishing but turned a blind eye. They knew the boarding students came from difficult backgrounds. Why punish them? One teacher said something very touching. Let them eat those fish so they have strength to study. If they become successful later, it's worth it. We kept releasing new fish for you to catch. The upcoming ghost story related to this fish-catching activity. Hong was naturally skilled at fishing and catching fish, enjoying nighttime activities. So within months of arriving at school, he had joined the secret fishing group with dormitory students. That evening, the fishing group consisted of 4 people, Hong and 3 12th graders. They went in a group so that when they caught fish, someone could immediately bring them inside to hide. They didn't dare leave them outside. Usually, they would just hook banana pieces to the fishing line and drop it in the pond. The snakehead fish would bite immediately, as they were very aggressive feeders. That night, dropping the bait resulted in an immediate bite. The fish struggled, splashing water everywhere. The students excitedly tried to pull it up, but when they finally got it to shore, it stopped moving. What was hooked wasn't a fish, but a fresh coconut shell, split in half. The 4 students looked at each other, not understanding what happened. They thought perhaps during the struggle, the fish had broken free and the hook had somehow caught the coconut shell. They waited about 10 minutes for the water to settle, then resumed fishing. The second time they dropped bait, a fish bit again, struggling like before. But when pulled up, it was again a coconut shell, not any fish. One of the students became frustrated, cursing and saying he'd been fishing here for nearly 3 years and never encountered anything like this. Initially, they thought it was the same coconut shell, but the previous one still lay on shore. This was a different shell. The frustrated student hooked new bait and cast again, declaring, "If I hook another coconut shell, I'm quitting fishing forever." This time, when the bait was taken and they pulled up their catch, what emerged horrified all 4 students. As they pulled it near shore, they saw the object was round. The frustrated student joked, "This time it's not half a coconut, but a whole coconut." He was already annoyed, saying, "Why don't you just eat the whole thing, shell and all? What's the point of throwing this stuff in here?" Just as he finished speaking, Hong heard a man's laughter from beside him, a mocking, teasing laugh. Initially thinking it was a teacher who had discovered them, he looked behind but saw no one. The other three also seemed to hear it and turned around like Hong, but they saw nobody. All four turned back to the pond. What was hooked on the fishing line was now a man's head. The hook was caught in his mouth, making it crooked to one side, causing him to speak with a slurred voice. "Why did you hook my mouth? Don't you know it hurts?" His eyes rolled back and forth. The sight was absolutely terrifying. Seeing this scene, the students immediately dropped their fishing rods and ran into the dormitory. When other students asked what happened, they told the whole story. Some believed them. Others thought they were making up stories to scare people, reasoning that they'd been secretly fishing for years without encountering any ghosts. The four insisted on their story. "We experienced this, believe it or not. It's up to you." They still had to retrieve their fishing rods to avoid discovery. The three 12th graders were too scared to go, but Hong was brave enough. He went with four other people to collect the rods. Naturally, those who went were the non-believers wanting to verify the story. When they arrived, there was no head to be seen. The two coconut shells from earlier had also vanished, despite being clearly left on shore. This disappearance made the skeptics even more convinced that the story was fabricated. These people then sat down to fish themselves, but this time, absolutely no fish bit their hooks. The matter passed, witnessed by only four people with no evidence, making it hard for others to believe. The student who had held the fishing rod that night was named Tai. After that night, Tai became continuously ill. Initially, it was just a mild sickness. Sometimes while studying, he'd get headaches and go to the infirmary for medicine, then return to the dormitory to rest. Then he developed a fever, missing 2 or 3 consecutive days of school. After recovering somewhat, he returned to classes, but was only slightly better, managing to sit through lessons but not fully recovered. He remained sick for about 10 days straight, not severe enough for hospitalization, but cycling between fever, taking medicine, recovering, running out of medicine, and getting fever again. Eventually, his parents visited and, seeing his condition, took him to the hospital. The hospital doctors provided care, but his condition didn't improve, it actually worsened. His grandmother decided to consult a spiritual healer. The healer said that Tai had gone fishing and encountered a human head. This person's spirit was following and tormenting him with illness. He wasn't actually physically sick. The healer specified that 4 people went fishing, with Tai being the leader holding the fishing rod. Among the 4, Tai had the weakest spiritual energy, so the ghost chose to follow and torment him. The grandmother returned and asked about this, finding the truth exactly as described. Tai's family had to make an offering of a pig's head, after which he recovered and returned to school normally. When he returned to school, he told everyone about this incident. Hong believed it, but some people still remained skeptical. Strangely, Hong and the other 3 never dared to fish again, but other people who fished there continued without problems. No encounters with ghosts or harassment, as if it depended on individual spiritual strength. Later, Hong recounted this story to a teacher named Mr. Lin, who said he believed it. The teacher explained that the school was built on land that previously contained many graves, though they had all been relocated. Having ghosts at school was quite normal. Regarding the fish pond specifically, the teacher had also encountered a ghost once. When they first started raising fish, Teacher Lin and another teacher were directly responsible for releasing fish and feeding them. One evening, the other teacher went to feed the fish first. When Teacher Lin walked out of the building toward the pond, he saw a shirtless man in underwear standing next to his colleague, completely soaked. Just as he was about to ask who it was, he saw the man push his colleague into the water. After the push, the man vanished in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, the colleague could swim. Teacher Lin ran over to pull him out. Before he could say anything, his colleague spoke first. "I was just standing there feeding the fish when I felt like someone's hand pushed me. When that person touched me, I felt very cold." Yet he had been standing there alone. Teacher Lin knew this was a supernatural incident, but didn't mention it, just saying his colleague must have slipped. However, when his colleague went home, he became ill. Initially thinking it was from falling into water and catching cold, Teacher Lin even teased him about being weak. But his colleague remained persistently ill without recovery. Only then did Teacher Lin remember the incident and suspect supernatural harassment, suggesting his colleague consult a spiritual healer. The consultation confirmed he was being tormented by a restless spirit. Following the healer's prescribed offerings and rituals, his colleague recovered. Since they were teachers, such matters couldn't be discussed openly. Only years later, when meeting for coffee, did they share these experiences. Next came a story from Huang's 11th grade year. By then, Tri and Ho had graduated. The room now housed Hong, Dat, Huyen, Lam, and 2 new 10th graders named Tan and Duk. During this time, there was a 12th grade girl who could be called the school's beauty queen. Her name was Hong. She had been the top student in her grade for 2 consecutive years and was very active in youth organization activities, being an outstanding member. What the boys like Hong found most noteworthy wasn't her academic achievements or organizational activities, but her beauty. She was beautiful from face to figure, very clever and cheerful, always smiling. Hong admitted that just one look at her would make any boy's heart flutter. Many pursued her, but according to Huang's information, she wasn't dating anyone. Since she also lived in the dormitory, he often heard Tri, Ho, Lam, and Huyen talking about her every night. Every night, he heard them saying how beautiful and talented she was, and how difficult it would be for guys like them to win her over. They praised her constantly. It got to the point where if Ho just walked past her and she smiled at him, he would come back and boast about it. Though in reality, she smiled at everyone she met, not specifically at him. Then one day, people were shocked to learn that Hong had committed suicide right in front of her dormitory room door. It was a Sunday morning. After studying all week, everyone wanted to sleep in on their day off, but at 7 a.m., they heard screaming. Initially, Hong was annoyed since he was still trying to sleep. The screaming continued, growing louder and more panicked. Hong and his roommates reluctantly got up to see what was happening. When they stepped outside, they saw a crowd gathered around the girls' dormitory section. Other students were also emerging from their rooms, drawn by the commotion. As they got closer, they could see what had caused the hysteria. There, hanging from the ceiling beam just outside her dormitory room, was Hong. She had used her bed sheets to fashion a noose. Her face was pale, her eyes bulging, and her tongue protruding, a sight that would haunt anyone who saw it. The discovery had been made by her roommate, who had woken up early to use the bathroom. Finding Hong's bed empty and the door slightly ajar, she had gone to look for her, only to find this horrifying scene. Her screams had awakened the entire dormitory. The school authorities were immediately called, as were the police and Hong's family. The entire school was in shock. How could such a bright, beautiful, and seemingly happy student take her own life? The questions multiplied when, during the investigation, it was discovered that Hong had been pregnant. The revelation sent shockwaves through the school community. Hong, the model student, the beauty queen, had been hiding a pregnancy. In the conservative environment of rural Vietnam in the 1990s, this was an unthinkable scandal. The stigma of an unmarried pregnancy, especially for a student, was overwhelming. As the investigation continued, more details emerged. Hong had been involved with a teacher at the school, a married man with children. When she discovered her pregnancy, she had approached him, hoping he would take responsibility. Instead, he had denied any involvement and threatened to ruin her reputation if she spoke out. Faced with the impossible choice between bearing a child out of wedlock and destroying her family's honor, or continuing her education and fulfilling her dreams, Hong had chosen a third option, one that would end all her troubles permanently. The teacher in question was quietly transferred to another school, and the administration tried to keep the details hushed. But in a small community like theirs, secrets were impossible to keep. The story spread like wildfire, and Hong's tragic end became a cautionary tale told in whispers. But death, it seemed, was not the end of Hong's story. Within days of her funeral, strange things began happening in the girls' dormitory. Students reported seeing a figure in white wandering the halls at night, always near Hong's former room. Some claimed to hear crying. Others reported feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness in certain areas of the building. Hong's former roommates requested transfers to other rooms, but the administration was reluctant to feed into what they considered superstitious nonsense. However, when several girls became ill with mysterious symptoms, depression, loss of appetite, and disturbing dreams, they had no choice but to take action. The room where Hong had lived was sealed off, officially for renovation, but everyone knew the real reason. The ghostly appearances continued, though less frequently. Students would catch glimpses of a figure in white, sometimes on the stairs, sometimes in the bathroom, always in the girls' section of the dormitory. The most disturbing reports came from students who claimed to have communicated with Hong's spirit. According to these accounts, Hong was trapped between worlds, unable to find peace because of the circumstances of her death. She was said to be searching for justice, for acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done to her. The school brought in Buddhist monks to perform cleansing rituals, but the disturbances continued. It seemed that Hong's spirit was not ready to depart. Some students reported dreams where Hong appeared to them, sometimes as the beautiful girl they remembered, sometimes as the terrifying figure they had found that morning. In these dreams, Hong would speak of her regret, her anger, and her desire for the truth to be known. She had been an honor student, a role model, and her death had been portrayed as a sudden breakdown, a moment of weakness. But Hong's spirit seemed determined to ensure that her story, the real story, would not be forgotten. The haunting of the girls' dormitory became as much a part of school lore as the ghost in the boys' room or the spirit in the fish pond. New students were warned about all three supernatural presences, and rituals developed around appeasing each of them. For Hong's spirit, students would leave flowers outside her former room and light incense on significant dates, her birthday, the anniversary of her death, and during exam periods when academic pressure was highest. They would whisper prayers for her peace and ask for her protection in their studies. The presence of these spirits, the bald man, the drowned soul, and Hong's restless ghost, created a unique atmosphere at the school. Rather than making it a place of fear, the supernatural elements became part of the community's identity. Students learned to coexist with these otherworldly residents, treating them with respect and understanding. Years later, when Hong had graduated and moved on with his life, he would often think back to those 3 years in the haunted dormitory. The experiences had shaped not just his understanding of the supernatural, but his appreciation for the thin line between life and death, between the world of the living and the realm of spirits. The school continued to operate. New generations of students came and went, but the stories remained. Each new class would hear the tales from their predecessors, adding their own experiences to the growing legend. The ghosts became part of the school's tradition, as much a part of the curriculum as mathematics or literature. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the moon cast shadows across the school grounds, those who listened carefully could still hear the footsteps of the bald man pacing in room 10, still see the ripples in the fish pond where the drowned soul lingered, and still catch glimpses of white moving through the girls' dormitory where Hong's spirit continued her eternal vigil. The school had become more than an institution of learning. It had become a place where the living and the dead coexisted, where the past refused to be forgotten, and where the mysteries of existence revealed themselves to those brave enough to look beyond the veil of the ordinary world. This was the story that Hong carried with him, a testament to the power of memory, the persistence of the human spirit, and the enduring nature of truth, even when that truth came from beyond the grave.